here to wrap up my reading for the month of July. And if you saw my 6-year anniversary Get Ready With Me chat, you will know that I am looking to mix things up a little bit and bring a little bit of freshness into some of my YouTube staples. So the format for today is going to be a little different than normal. We're going to see how this goes. This is a first for all of us. Also, once again, it is thundering out. Welcome to summer in the South. There's lots of random thunderstorms. So sorry that the lighting is so janky because it is the middle of the day. It is as if it is 9 o'clock at night. So, reading overall for July I think was pretty good, but had a lot of DNFs in it. I'm finding that I'm DNFing more and more as the year goes on. It is angry out. An entire limb just came from my neighbor's house. Wow. Okay, well, let's all say a prayer for us here. And actually, I just got a bunch of severe weather notifications, so maybe I'm gonna pause. I'll be back once the storm finishes blowing through. Okay.
1 hour later.
Okay, well that was an unexpected little detour. I had very scared kitty cats and they are still hiding. It's still thundering a little bit, but I think we're good enough to try to dive back in. Okay, so I don't totally remember where we were, but I think more or less I was starting to say that June was a pretty good reading month for me, but not great. And my overall average was pretty low. In terms of like my new stats layout, I would say the thing that is most notable to me from this kind of roll up is the fact that my rating was pretty low relative to where it typically is. Usually anything around a 3.5 is pretty good. You know, theoretically if it's over a 3, it's not terrible, but 3.25 is actually pretty low for me these days. And it is because I have just been a DNFing queen, and if I had included every DNF, it would have been even lower. So then the way I thought we would try to do this wrap up is to do me showing you all of the books I've read and then talking about different categories and superlatives, so you'll understand as we get into it. So first of all, here are all the books I read this month. I read a total of 18 books, 12 of which I owned or were on my TBR, 6 of which I did not. These are all of the advanced reader copies that I read for the month, most of which I've either talked about or I'm going to talk about as like a superlative. But in terms of arcs themselves, my 2 superlatives I wanted to call out were Thornhedge for one by T. Kingfisher, because this surprised me with what it ended up being. I knew it was a fairy tale retelling a la Sleeping Beauty. I didn't realize it was a novella for one thing, so FYI, it is short and not everybody is into that. For me, that was fine. And I also it ended up having a kind of perspective I wasn't expecting necessarily. We have a point of view character who was exchanged with a changeling fae child. So our point of view character is human, but like was raised in the realm of the fairy. And I just thought that it was an interesting take on the story. I'm not sure it totally came together, but I felt like it was not what I was expecting exactly, but because it's T. Kingfisher and I just love the way she does her fantasy storytelling and the kinds of elements she includes, it still ended up really working for me. The other superlative I wanted to call out was arc I most struggled with in terms of how to rate it and to finish it. Not because it was bad, but just, I don't know. I'm kind of just not sure what happened with me in this book. That's The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. It's a new beginning to an epic fantasy, and it's so long. And it took me so long to read it. It took me like a few months because I could just never fully get into it. Even though the writing is really nice and I think some of the themes and stuff are cool, like world building wise is pretty cool. We have like this sort of magical library realm that reminded me a lot of the way like Piranesi's world is described. It kind of gave me those vibes. And we also have, you know, this other point of view character who has been captured / like enslaved, and then I don't know. It just, there's a lot of interesting things going on, but it's just really long and it didn't feel like it had a lot of momentum to it. It felt very repetitious in parts, but then it eventually like starts going someplace that's very interesting. I don't know. This one I just struggled with. So I ultimately gave it 3.5 stars because I think it's very well written. I just don't know. It just didn't click with me totally, I guess. In terms of challenges, I did read a good number of books for different challenges or vlogs vlogs or reading projects I had going on, buddy reads, etc. Most surprising were The Housemaid and The Therapist, and you'll see those in a vlog that should be coming next week. So I won't say too much, but those were the most surprising of the books I was reading for a vlog. And then I would say my favorite thing I read for one challenge or another is Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. I talked about this in my mid-month check-in, which was live. So if you didn't catch it because it was live, it is still up. I leave my lives up. Very many, I'm not sure if I've ever taken a live down. So yeah, if you're interested in kind of hearing a discussion about that, I buddy read this with Leanna and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. We're reading the final book together next month, and then I believe we will do a live show on her channel. So this was my favorite thing I read for one challenge or another. In terms of things I'm most excited to have completed for challenge stuff, I am proud that I once again read 2 Nora Roberts books this month for Reading Roberts. I am inching my way to being 50% of the way through her oeuvre, and that is what I really am hoping I can get to this year. And then I'm glad that I caught up with Anchor and Aspects series from Ruby Dixon. That has been on my series TBR for this 6-month period, and I knew that there was a new one coming out, so I am glad I went ahead and read Wed to the Wild Gods so that I could then read Servant to the Spy Day, which, let me tell you, I think in my Goodreads review I was like, come for the, enslaved sex worker navigating agency within her new role, stay for the spiderweb ejaculate. Yes, it was an interesting one, but I thought I really like Yelena in that series, so I was excited to see her story, but I am proud of myself for making time to get to those books. Okay, and then I thought that maybe the main categories I could talk about are my favorite and least favorite of the month, and my most recommended and least recommended of the month. So let's start with my favorite and least favorite, maybe. So my least favorite was an advanced reader copy of Spin a Black Yarn by Josh Mallerman. And yeah, I don't know. It was my least favorite because I really, really wanted to like it. There were things in this collection of novellas, I guess is probably the way I would describe it, that I thought was very successful. Okay, sorry, my power blinked on and off. We're not out of the woods yet. Okay. Spin a Black Yarn. I had a lot of ambivalence towards this because it was a collection of stories that I think had a lot of really interesting premises to them. It's a horror collection, I would say, and some of the concepts I think were very horrifying. But I just don't think I really get on very well with Josh Mallerman's writing style. I have read, so like his hooks always sound really interesting to me. And I have read Bird Box, which I was so on. I didn't like it nearly as much as it seems like everybody else did. I read, oh gosh, I forget what it was called. It was that one where there was the school for girls and the school for boys. And I thought, again, it had a lot of interesting ideas in it, but I think it had a glaring plot hole issue to it in the setup because the whole thing is presupposing heterosexuality, basically. And I was like, well, that means you're always going to have at least 10%-ish, if not more, of your population that this is going to be a problem for. It was okay. And then this, yeah, the writing I thought was bad. I guess I just need to come out and say it. I thought the writing in this was bad. It was really clunky. It felt like a first draft. It did not feel like a fully refined body of work. And it completely tanked every story. I'm trying to remember if I ended up liking any of them. I thought some of the ideas, and there's this, I think it's the second or third story in the collection, is about a man who has wanted to be a serial murderer but has held himself back and now he's on his deathbed. I thought that there were like parts of that were interesting, but it was still very much telling instead of showing. I don't know. This one did not click for me. I ended up giving it 2 stars, which I honestly think was pretty generous. So for me, that was my least favorite. And I guess I just feel guilty because I want to like this author so much more than it seems like I end up actually liking him. I don't know. My favorite thing I read by a mile was Mammoths at the Gate by Niveau. I gave this 5 stars, and this is my favorite in this series of the Singing Hill cycle that she has going. This series in general is about storytelling and how storytelling affects people and how it impacts the way they self-conceptualize, how they look at the world, etc. I thought that theme was really, really well well integrated into this particular installment. But the other thing that I thought was really wonderful about this particular book is that we are going with Cleric Chi to their monastery, and we kind of get to see what their formation has been like, or what it was like, understand some of the politics, or kind of more about the order. I think we also get some really wonderful stuff from Almost Brilliant. This I thought was really touching. It may have been partially, I'm not gonna lie to you, it may also be because I read this around Father's Day, which tends to be like my most tender time vis-a-vis my dead dad. It's not his death date or his birthday or Christmas. Like for me, it's always Father's Day that feels kind of tender. And I think that this addresses the idea of grief, and specifically the idea of grief for a father figure, really wonderfully. So I absolutely love this. Could you read this as a standalone? I'm not totally sure, which is why it's not my most recommended, but I think maybe you could, but don't. Just go back and read the rest of the novellas. They're great. And if you have been reading this series, I think you're going to be really pleased with this. So this comes out in September, and it is my favorite installment to date in this series. So very exciting there. And then my most recommended and least recommended. So these are not, least recommended in this sense is not always going to be books I don't like. In fact, in our first instance, this is a book I actually quite like, but I don't necessarily, it's the least recommendable. That's kind of what I'm going for with this, of what I think has the broadest appeal, which versus what I think has a very narrow appeal. And in this case, I think that The Mysteries of Thorn Manor has a very narrow appeal because you're only gonna like it if you liked the first book and you're cool with a novella that's very fan servicey. Because I did like the first book and because I enjoyed the dynamics of the three main characters in that book, I quite enjoyed this novella. I think particularly the dynamics between Elizabeth and Silas, who is her love interest's demon. I thought there were some really poignant scenes with them. I really like this book, but the appeal of this is very narrow, so I don't necessarily widely recommend it. In contrast, my most recommended book for this month, I would say, is Dark Corner by Megan Golden. This I gave 4.5 stars to. It comes out in August, but it is a July Book of the Month Club pick if you would like to read it early. It was just so entertaining and so fun. I have technical issues with this book, so I was between a 4 and a 4.5, but at the end of the day, this is the kind of book that I just want to be entertained by, and I found this so entertaining. I read this while my family was in town, and they had rented a house with a pool, so like I was reading it by the pool while we were all hanging out and enjoying each other, and it's a great book for that kind of vibe. So this is the follow-up to Night Swim, which is an excellent mystery thriller book that revolves around a character named Rachel Kroll, who has a true crime podcast. And I will say, based on some of the reviews I was looking at, if you love that character, you might not end up liking this as much, because apparently a lot of people felt like the characterization was really disjointed from the first book to the second. I did not remember enough of her characterization to feel that, but just FYI, apparently some people do feel that way. So that didn't bother me. She's in between seasons or cases that she's investigating, and the FBI out of the blue is like, come here immediately. We need you to help us with something. And so she kind of drops everything, and it turns out that she is basically the only lead they have of what might have happened to this missing woman who was visiting a suspected serial killer in the Florida State Prison outside of like the Daytona Beach area, and he mentioned Rachel's name, and so she's like the only clue that they have of what might have happened to this woman who went missing right after seeing him or talking to him. So she's being brought in to help with that like missing woman investigation piece, and then there's also the like, is he actually a serial killer investigation, and then we also get the script for the podcast that she eventually makes about how all of this comes together. And for me, all of those different elements were so entertaining. It kept me turning the pages. It was going in directions that I think at times were predictable and at other times not. I actually really like the direction that this ultimately ends up going in, because I thought it was very successful, and I liked that it wasn't the most obvious path. So yeah, just all of that I thought really worked. I think the writing I struggled with, because the podcast scripts are so well written And then when we cut back to the like narration or like the real time what's happening, it's not as well written in my opinion. It feels clunkier. There's an overuse of people's first names that's distracting in the dialogue. So I just find that part of her writing a little bit distracting, and especially in contrast to how well written the podcast segments are. I think Megan Golden comes from a journalistic background, so she's really good at writing that kind of like article tone, but is maybe not as good at the fiction side. But regardless, if that doesn't bother you, I think that this was a very entertaining version of what it is. It is my favorite Megan Golden book I have read so far, and for me it was a worthy follow-up to Night Swim, though again, like I said, if you really love that character, apparently some people felt like she was a little bit different in this book, so just know that. But if you're just looking for like entertaining thriller, this is the one that I think I could most widely recommend. Totally makes sense to me why this is a book of the month club pick. This feels like, ooh yeah, like for the summer when people are traveling and you need something to just like suck you in to help you ignore all the chaos around you, that it feels like that kind of book. So yeah, I feel like it's the one that I could most broadly recommend out of everything I read this month. So yeah, that is my June wrap up. Like I said, we tried something a little bit different this time. We're trying to mix it up a little bit, but this is still being workshopped, so please forgive me for, you know, the format maybe not being as smooth, and also just Mother Nature impinging upon the window I had to film in. So, you know, have some grace there. But also, I would love to hear any thoughts you have about kind of this change in format. And yeah, I think that will do it for me. Let me know how your reading went in June. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!